I just finished making this adorable princess sock doll on my Sentro 22 needle circular knitting machine. It will also work if you have an Addi 22 circular knitting machine. I'll show step by step how I make this. This will be part 1, so hit that like and follow for part 2. To get started, we're going to cast on. If you have followed me, you know I have issues with my 22 Sentro circular knitting machine that the gears pop and skip. I have found one easier fix is to cast and crank the rows backwards. And so that's what I'm doing here. It seems to make it's not perfect, but it does pop and skip less. So I start at my black needle and then I go over and under each needle one time around. And the first time to cast on backwards, it kind of messed with my brain a little bit, but I did get there. And then we're just going to crank the rows once we get back to our first needle here. I'm going to put it in the yarn holder, and then I don't put this in the tensioner at all because this yarn is a little bit on the thicker side, and so the machine is a bit more finicky when it comes to yarn as well. And for the hair, I'm using yellow, and then I'm going to crank 10 rows. And I like to start and stop my rows all at that black needle. So once the hair's done, I remove that yarn. I have it on the left side of my black needle. I just like to keep it consistent. And then I'm going to add on now the yarn for the face. And again, I put it on the left side of my black needle and then into my yarn holder. Since I went a little bit past, you just want to make sure that yarn is catching underneath that needle if you accidentally do it like I did. And then for the face, we are going to crank out 10 rows as well. Once our face is completed, you're going to take your yarn, cut it, and then also put it back into the middle of your machine. And now we're going to do the torso with the dress color. I'm using this yarn from Premier that's called Twinkle. It's really soft and it also has a little bit of a shimmer to it and sparkles. I don't know if you can see that in the video, but it's really nice to work with and the machine seems to like it as well. And so for the torso, I am going to do 12 rows. Once the torso is done, now we're going to do the legs. For the legs, I also crank 12 rows and I'm using the same yarn as I used for the face. And this is the Big Twist Value brand yarn for the hair and the legs. Once the legs are done, put that yarn back into the middle of the machine, and now we're going to do the shoes. The shoes, I chose the Caron Party yarn, and it has a little bit of silver shimmery in it as well. And this is the gray color, and we're going to do 10 rows for the shoe because this is going to be a double layer, so the filling doesn't come out of her. So this is 5 rows each for both layers. So just do 10 rows in total. Once our shoes are done, now we're going to work backwards and going to do the legs again. So I'm going to take that same yarn that I used for the legs and do an additional 12 rows because this is the second layer now. And so once the 12 rows are done for the legs, we're going to do the torso again. So the torso was another 12 rows. Again, this is for the second layer. So I'm using the Premier Twinkle yarn, same as what I used for the first layer, and do 12 rows. And now we're going to do the face again. And again, this is the Big Value Twist brand yarn, and it's going to be 10 rows. And then lastly, once you get the face done again, now we're going to end with the hair, which is the yellow yarn. This is also the Big Twist Value brand yarn as well, and it will be 10 rows. And then we will cast off with this yellow yarn as well. And just remember, because we are cranking and I cast it on backwards or the opposite way, you cast off backwards or the opposite way as well. So I'm doing it on the left side of the machine, which usually I pick up the stitches on the right side of my machine. Once off the machine, now we need to keep it inside out, and we wanted to secure all the tail ends of our yarn that we did for all the different colors, and I knot them multiple times to secure them. Once that is finished, now I'm just going to take my tube and put it knit side or right side out, and then I'm going to double it up just like how you would a beanie hat. We're going to take one side of the tube and pull it through to the other side of the tube so all the same color yarn matches up together. Once we have our 2 layers and everything's lining up, now we're going to close the top of our tube. I do the inside layer first, and I pull the working end of the yellow yarn, that's the tail, and we cinch it closed because doing the cast on and the cast off like we did, it makes like a drawstring effect. So I pull it to close it up, and then I'm just going to take my needle and I'm going to knot it into place, and then I like to sew it back and forth a few times through where that hole is where it closed, just so it doesn't open up on us. And then I do the exact same thing to the exterior tube. I take the working end of the yarn and I pull it tight like a drawstring, and then again I knot it into place, and then I use my needle to sew it back and forth a few times so that hole doesn't come up. Now we're going to work on the skirt. For the skirt, you need your 48 needle circular knitting machine, and you're going to start with waste yarn. So I just have some extra yellow yarn, and I'm going to cast on starting at my white needle. I go over and under each needle one time around till I get back to that white needle, and then I put it into my yarn holder. And then for waste yarn, I like to do between 7 to 10 rows. It can just kind of depend on how many rows you would like to do or how big of waste yarn you have. So crank out between that 5 and 10 rows for your waste yarn, and then we are going to add on the project yarn for our skirt, and that is going to be the same yarn that we used for the torso, the pixie light blue color. And for the skirt, I do 32 rows. Once the 32 rows are done, cut that and put it in the middle of the machine. It's on the left side of my white needle. And now we're going to add on some more waste yarn. Again, I just use the same yellow yarn that I have. And again, between that 5 and 10 rows, you can crank the waste yarn once your yarn is all gone, or you can cut it once you have enough rows. Then you can just crank the machine one more time around. And then the second time around, once there's no yarn, it will fall off the machine. Now to finish the skirt, once it's off the machine, once I take it off, I give it a little bit of a stretch, and then we want to have the purl side or the wrong side facing out for right now. And so that's the bar side. The knit side now is on the inside, or the V-stitch side. And we are going to take a hair tie and we're going to slip it over the tube. So the hair tie is touching the purl side, and put it in the middle. That's going to be our waistband. Now I fold the two ends of the tubes together so we have wrong sides touching each other. And now the right side, or the knit side, is facing out. To close the skirt, we're going to slip stitch it with the crochet hook. So this is why you want to have the waste yarn be a contrasting color from your project yarn. You'll see the yellow, that's the waste yarn, and then the first row of blue, that's the live stitches of our project yarn. Those are the stitches you want to pick up and slip stitch back and forth, one side to another, all the way around. And you just want to take your time to make sure you do not skip any stitches, because if you remove the waste yarn and you have skipped a stitch, it will have a hole, and then that stitch is live, and since it's not attached to anything, it will drop and unravel. So take your time when doing this, and then before you remove the waste yarn, just pull it tight all the way around and make sure you don't have any holes. Once you get back to the start where the tail ends of the yarns are, I just slip through the tail ends through the last stitch to secure them in place, and then I knot them. And this is how I check to make sure I didn't skip any stitches. I'm pulling it and there are no holes. If there was a big hole or gap, then you would know you have missed a stitch. So you then want to undo your slip stitches and pick up the stitches before you move on. Last step is now to remove your waste yarn. There's going to be one side that's easier to remove than the other. The cast on side is the one where you have, since it's locked in place, you need to pull out the first piece of yarn, and then it will all come out really easy. You could also opt to do a ravel cord cast on. I have that pinned to the top of my page if you would like to see how to do that. But once you get it unlocked, then it's real easy to remove. And then I like to roll a ball as I'm removing the waste yarn. It just helps to save a little extra step. But here's the side, and you can see it's real easy to undo. And then the other side, which is the cast off side, you'll just pull the tail end of that working yarn, and it will completely unravel as well to remove it. Once all of your waste yarn is removed, I just take the tail ends of the working yarn and I just knot them together a few more times to make sure they are secure. And then with a needle, I put them in between the two layers and cut off any excess. Part 2 will be up next, where we finish making our doll. Please like, subscribe, and follow for more tutorials, and happy crafting.